Begin tonight in Hungary, where thousands have rallied in protest over the country's controversial new constitution. The government has celebrated the changes, and the Prime Minister, Viktor has said the constitution helps the country's transition from its communist past. But critics fear it could push Hungary away from democracy and is simply shoring up the government's power. There's been international criticism to the constitutional changes as well, including from the United States and the European Union. Now, all this has played out as the Central European nation's economy suffers deeply, despite the government's promise in 2010 of creating 1 million workplaces. Well, for more on this, let's speak with Viktor Sziget-Vári. He's a political scientist, a journalist, and he's been a Hungarian government advisor. He's also been a campaign director for the election campaigns of the Hungarian Socialist Party. And Viktor Sziget-Vári joins us on the phone from Budapest. Viktor Sziget-Vári, thank you very much for your time. Why are people opposed to this new constitution?
Good evening. Mainly because there's a new flow of dissatisfaction, mainly because of the new constitution, but it also affects a lot of fundamental issues in the Hungarian institutional framework of our democracy. And people, because of this and because of also the unsustainable fiscal policies and the strains of economic crisis, are beginning to become fed up with the new government.
Before we look at the economic side of things, what are some of those elements, those key elements that you mentioned there that people are protesting within the constitution that they feel is attacking their rights?
There are some symbolic issues that are very hard to understand for international audiences, but the main thing is that the symbolic level of the new constitution is only supposed the ideology of the political right, because the constitution was not voted with a political consensus in the parliament, but only by a one-party vote, although with a two-thirds majority in the parliament. And on non-symbolic issues, the constitutional court, the independent budget council, the national bank, the judiciary system, was all reformed in other laws resulting from the new constitution, and the checks and balances in our democracy that were very strong since the democratic transition in 1990 have been pretty much limited, and this is the biggest problem and the biggest concern.
Now, Victor, as we're talking, there are pictures we're seeing from the rallies overnight showing thousands in the streets there in Budapest. From what walks of life in Hungarian society do these protesters come from?
It's pretty interesting because last year we had two pretty big protests, a bit smaller than this one yesterday, against the government. But the public there yesterday, I wasn't there, but my friends were there, was pretty much changed, because middle classes and lower middle classes were also there yesterday compared to previous anti-government protests where the lower middle classes were not present. A lot of parties, independent civic movements, from gay movements to other new parties and new civic movements were presented there, but also opposition parties from the parliament. So it's a pretty huge and wide from political progress and centre to civic movements.
Now, Prime Minister Orbán has been reported as saying these changes are designed in part to complete the country's transition from communism, from its communist past. Why isn't that argument washing with a good deal of the Hungarians? Why do so many members of the community doubt that argument?
To be honest, there was a sense of need for correction after the last 20 years, because there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the way how our country came out of the transitional period, and the new government, this right-wing government, started to address these problems, but I believe that they misaddressed these problems, and people are fed up because their real problems are not addressed, and the changes that the government made are limiting our democracy, and people like to live in a democracy in country and like to live in a democratic Hungary, and their freedom is being limited now, and they don't like that.
Even down to a name. What's behind the name change from the Republic of Hungary to Hungary, and why is that stirring such debate?
It's a symbolic thing, because we had a lot of foreign powers influencing our not that much independent country during the last two hundreds of years, and now we became an independent country in 1990, became a republic, and Hungarian right wing always criticized this republican ideal, because in Hungary the right wing is much more closer to the historic ideals and the historical relationship with our past, and because of that they wanted to deny this new beginning from 1990, and they wanted to go back to our historic past. This is what I've said, that the symbolic level of our new constitution is pretty much preferring only the right wing and the ideology of the Hungarian right.
As you mentioned, there has been worries as well about the economic platforms built into this. And given that this government promised 1 million new workplaces when they came to power in 2010, and given that the Hungarian economy is, like so many in Europe, really suffering at the moment, how great are those economic concerns and fears feeding the protests?
These concerns are pretty big, and the problem is that before this government came into power, the government in which I was involved, so I cannot be unbalanced on judging the performance of that crisis-managing government, but we did a pretty good job to at least limit the effects of the crisis. The biggest problem is that the government changed the fiscal policies, limited all the independent bodies, and that resulted a totally irresponsible and unsustainable fiscal policy that nationalized the mandatory private arm of the pension system, used only one-off expenses to limit budget deficit, but they didn't change the structural deficit, did not want it to make sustainable reform in the budget. And so because of that, and also because of a totally irresponsible and never seen before flat tax system that really only is good for the upper middle classes and really upper middle classes in Hungary, because of this, there's a significant social dissatisfaction in certain groups of our society. And the biggest problem is that the new constitution makes huge swaths of public policy changeable only by a two-thirds vote of subsequent parliament. So from here on, all tax policies and fiscal policies must be decided by a two-thirds supermajority. And when Paul Krugman wrote about this in New York Times, and he was really unable to accept that and unable to believe that this can be true, that the power of any future government with a mere majority will be limited, because two-thirds majority is going to be required to reform even the tax system that is really up to any government to do.
And finally, more protests planned, more expected on the streets of Budapest and other major centres in Hungary?
I think, sooner or later some other protests will appear. The biggest problem is that the opposition is not united yet, nor the parliamentary nor the non-parliamentary one, and the new leaders there still lack the credibility. So we will still see some developments on that side of the political horizon.
Viktor Sziget-Vári in Budapest, thank you very much for speaking to the world tonight.
Thank you very much.